Sophie Hardy and the Battle of the Myriad by M.R. Dale, narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 23, Let Them In. Back in Meliora, the Encantado sat up with the most powerful headache he thought anyone could have ever had. It was like someone had stabbed him in the side of his temple, and for a few minutes he didn't know where he was or what he was doing. New memories flashed through his mind, memories that he hadn't lived, or had he? He couldn't be sure. Visions of 3 girls that had left him in the pit in the Amazon flashed through his mind, but they weren't memories from the Amazon. They were memories of a dark, dingy cell where the girls had shouted at him repeatedly. One had even pinned him up against the wall, and another had stood back while he fell apart at the idea of Condenar coming. Then he remembered a memory that he had lived. Just a while ago, he had helped one of these girls find her parents. This angered him even more. These girls had tortured him in these new memories, but he had been helpful and courteous in the ones he could remember. Then another memory flashed through that he hadn't lived, or had he? One of a man who had promised him freedom and rewards if he did just one thing. What was that one thing? He just couldn't remember, focus as he might. It was the same man who had helped him out of the pit. He could see his face now that he had seen it again in real life in one of these new, fake memories. But it wasn't real life. These weren't his memories, were they? After a few seconds, the stabbing pain started to subside. He was able to focus more clearly. He now had a raging hatred for these girls who had taken advantage of him. They had set him up and planned all this from the start, to get information about the one girl's parents. The strange man from his vision of the cell and memory of the pit had told him exactly that. Then he remembered the girl's dad, the one with the dark hair, the one who had stopped him from achieving his goal all that time ago and sent him to rot in the prison instead of getting back to those he loved. Suddenly, his thought train changed track again. Siding with this man who had helped him out of the pit was his only hope of getting on the good side of Condenar, the man had said while in the cell a second ago, or was it longer? All he had to do was go with him to face the human public to show that mythicals had returned, but there was still something else. What was it? He had to do something first. The loss, or was it that it was just yet to come, of his final memory was grating. His head began to hurt even more as he strained to try and remember what the man had asked him to do. He had to do just one thing to be treated well and make himself excel, not like he had to do if he was to stay in Meliora. That would take years of self-improvement. This wellness and self-improvement would be instantaneous. The man had assured him of that. Then his wife and child flashed into his mind. He missed them so much, and he hadn't seen them in such a long time, and had no way of getting to them. Or did he? Now that there was the boy, perhaps he could reach them. As he closed his eyes for one last focus, sirens started to sound round him. It was the emergency alarm, the call for everyone to gather at the epicentre as a danger was imminent. Echidna had said it had never been sounded before when he had first arrived, but here it was, plain as day, wailing deafeningly all over Meliora. He looked out of his window and saw all sorts of creatures hurtling through their zones towards the epicentre. He remembered something else. The man, King, that was his name, had told him that he needed more mythicals to get on the good side of Condenar, to show her that everlasting peace was his goal. King needed to take them with him to meet the public and show her that all was well on Earth and that it didn't need changing. Lies? Who knew? But that wasn't the last thing he needed to do. Ah! He thought as he closed his eyes again. What was it? As the alarm continued to screech and the final few mythicals finished hurtling towards the epicentre, he closed his eyes one last time. Open the door, he remembered. Open the door to Meliora. That was it. That was what the man had asked him to do. All he had to do was let the man in through the front door, and Condenar would judge him well. He climbed down from his room and sneaked off towards the main door of Meliora to let his saviour in, the hatred for the 3 girls rising again. Outside the door, Sophie began her slow, trepid walk towards King and the hooded teen. Neither of them flinched, but Sophie could sense that she might be about to call on her combat training that she hadn't needed at all in the last 7 weeks. She sincerely hoped that she wouldn't need it, but she knew how to handle herself in the playground, and surely it wouldn't be that different in the real world. Although, having seen Manita in action against the Chimera, Manita was unlike anything Sophie had trained against before. Behind her, the other 3 girls made their way forwards too in support of Sophie. Clara and Yasmin had seen her stand up to Desmeralda and not flinch, and so felt confident in that sense. But this was different. They could also tell that this wasn't going to be a stand around and talk it out situation. This was going to get messy. King would not give up his company that easily, even in the face of this oncoming villain he knew was coming. He was a man prepared for the worst, and nothing was going to take what he had built away from him. Sophie reached one of the figures and pulled its hood clean off its head without a second thought. It was King's avatar. "Good guess," Clara whispered from behind her. Ignoring the comment, Sophie addressed King directly. "You can't be serious. Those mythicals in there have done nothing wrong. They live in peace and strive to get better." Without turning his head, King spoke to Manita, but still looked Sophie square in the eye. "See, she still defends these monsters that have hurt you, taken something away. Still she stands on their side. Would it not be better, safer even, for humanity if she was silenced along with her friends?" Manita nodded at what King was saying. To her now, Sophie had not stopped Desmeralda from causing the vanishing, which resulted in her mum leaving and then her dad abandoning her, for that's what King had told her. She had conspired with the occupants of the Mythical's home and warned them of their arrival. She was not to be listened to. Before another word could be uttered, there was a noise from behind Sophie and the girls, and the door to Meliora opened. As Sophie went to speak to King again, she found herself being catapulted through the air and landing with a thump about 20 metres from where she started. She picked herself up and dusted herself down. Due to her being in her avatar, the pain was kept to a minimum, but she watched on in horror as Manita instantly cloned herself 3 times and took one of the other girls each and did the same thing to them as she'd just done to Sophie. Yasmin and Clara had been sent flying the other way to Sophie, whereas Manita's hands went straight through Lizzie's soft light avatar, so the Manita clone tutted, rolled her eyes, and dismissed Lizzie as being no threat to her whatsoever. The girls then watched as King and Manita marched up the final steps, through the door to Meliora, and, before any of them could zone to the top of the stairs, the door closed behind them. King and Manita were in. Lizzie went to put her hands over her ears, but Sophie took hold of her fingers, stopped her, and looked her in the eye. "I've got you. You're fine," she said to Lizzie. Before Lizzie could react, Clara and Yasmin zoned over to where Sophie and Lizzie were stood. "Well?" Yasmin asked, while Sophie picked Lizzie up off the floor. "We can't get through that door without a mythical," Clara said, stating the already known. "We can get out, but we can't get in. It's okay, though," Sophie began. "King isn't the only person with someone on the inside." The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by M.R. Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, then be sure to check out our website, www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.